reactions that people have toward praise and toward criticism, why that is, and what our reactions are, and what we should strive to achieve, and how we should react to these different situations when we are either praised or if we are criticized. So he says that there are four states of people. There are four types of people. He said those that rejoice in praise and they hate criticism, which is most of us. The second one is those individuals that hide their joy, meaning that somebody praises them and they try not to make it apparent, or they're criticized and they try not to make their anger apparent. The third, equal, whether they're praised or whether they're criticized, it's all the same. And lastly, those who are sincere. And sincere, he mentions a range of emotions and a range of responses, which we'll talk about, inshallah, what that means and how that is to be achieved. So the first one, the individuals who rejoice, and this is a very common response. Anytime somebody praises us, immediately our heart flutters, right? Like we get happy that somebody's talking good about us, or the moment somebody criticizes us, like we feel that pinch, right? Right? Our egos get a little bit pinched. So I think this is the most common and probably the most natural response to many of these situations that most, if not all of us, have faced or dealt with. The second one, he says, is a little bit better because now you're making that effort. So he says that, okay, the first one is a common one. The second level, right, like if you're moving up levels and trying to become better and trying to improve, is like, all right, well, at least I make a show that I'm trying to hide what it is that I'm feeling about this praise or what it is that I'm feeling about this criticism. Then he goes on to talk about the third state, and he says that this is when they're equal, right? Whether somebody praises me or whether somebody criticizes me, it doesn't make that big a difference. And he says here that this is actually what he calls the first level of perfection. And when you reach this state, he's saying now you're getting somewhere, right? This is actually a point where you can judge and you can tell that you are making progress in learning how to hone and how to react to both praise and to criticism. And he mentions that there are a few signs for this. He says that when somebody critiques us, we don't feel anything, right? It's totally normal. It's completely fine. He says that even if we sit with that person, we don't, what I mean? Sometimes like we feel a certain way, like, like we'll catch a feeling when somebody criticizes us. We might not want to be around them. We might not want to sit with them. So he's saying like this, it doesn't really make a difference if that person is there or if that person is absent. You don't have any desire to make him change his mind either. So if somebody critiques you, you're not really interested in changing what he feels or what he says about you. And he says that the other end of the spectrum actually applies here as well, that whether that person is there or if he's absent, it doesn't really make a difference, right? You don't hope that he's absent, and you're not sad when he is. And he also says the same thing about praise, right? So the same things would apply, meaning that if somebody praises me, it doesn't really have an effect on me. I don't try to further or make a better relationship with the person that praises me. So he's saying like this is a person who's actually found that that balance there. So he says that an individual who tries to seek for this, he said that this is actually very difficult and it's very challenging because the natural reaction that all of us have, and it is part of our taba, that we want to be praised, right? So even if we get to a point, right, because it's a journey, right? So even if we get to a point where it's like, yeah, this stuff doesn't really affect me, there might be a time when somebody praises me, and what happens? My heart starts, right? My heart starts getting and leaning toward that again, and I start enjoying it again. So he says that, okay, well, that happens naturally, right? This is something that will happen. And he says, and the reason that this happens is not just because of the natural inclination, but the shaitan also takes advantage of that moment, and he beautifies that for him. And this discussion, it actually gets really interesting, and I thought it was like, subhanAllah, I thought it was so relevant, where he says that it gets to a point where I start fooling myself, thinking that anyone who criticizes me is now criticizing the religion, and anybody who's praising me is praising the religion. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. It becomes a religious position and status that we give ourselves. And many times, individuals who will fall into this, it's because they feel what? Essentially. I'm sorry? Or it's arrogance, right? But it's covered in the gown of religiosity. It's covered in the gown of taqwa or deeds. But if anytime you challenge them, or anytime you speak to them, or anytime you say something to them, their immediate response is going to be what? That I am? I'm sorry? Oh, I'm not just better, I'm right. And it doesn't matter how they're challenged. It doesn't matter what you present to them. It doesn't matter what you say to them. Every single answer and every single response is going to be some type of justification. Every single response is going to be some type of, they'll always come from a place of authority, or they'll just reject whatever it is you have to say, even if it's a logical point. And the reason is the shaitan, what has the shaitan done? He's beautified all of this under the guise of religion. SubhanAllah, there's even a group of people now that will use praising and criticism as a means to judge others. And it's sad. It's actually very sad, because this is not the religion Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent. I mean, just imagine going around and saying like, oh, this person is like such and such, and this person is like such and such, and then I've convinced myself that no, what I'm doing is religion. And I have to judge people. And I have to distinguish between people. Because if I don't distinguish between people, how will I know what is right from wrong? What's wrong with this, other than the arrogance element of it? What is the essential problem with this issue? Or what is the essential problem with this mindset? I'm sorry? All right, they're definitely blinded, for sure. But I'm saying, essentially, who am I to determine who's right and who's wrong? Who am I to determine if this person is upon the haqq or this person is not? And whenever we get into the forum of discussion, whenever we enter the marketplace of ideas, it should always be discussions focused around ideas. It should never be focused around people and individuals. Because people will pass, people will die, people will change, but ideas will always remain. And if I want to challenge something, I should always focus on challenging that idea, because challenging a person, again, people can change. And how many of us have gotten into discussions or gotten into arguments where we actually were able to successfully, change somebody else's mind? It happens. Sometimes we don't, sometimes we do. But it shows us the propensity and the ability for every single one of us to change. So we should never put ourselves on a moral pedestal thinking that, oh, I'm here to, Allah has blessed me, therefore I'm here to judge the peons, right? And I'm here to judge the people who are lesser than me or lower than me. Because the only one that put me on that pedestal was myself. I don't know it. And it's scary, right? It's scary how a person is able to get caught up in this cycle. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The less honor that is bestowed on someone. Allahu alam. I don't know. It's tough, akhi. It's tough to say. D- are we not honored in different ways? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Like I've honored all of the sons of Adam. I'm sorry? So this is another good question. How do we deal with karamat? Like, what is a karama? What is a sign that people have? Sometimes people are instantly cured, right? They'll have this illness, they'll have this sickness, they'll make dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure them immediately. Right? This is a karama. Sometimes you'll enter upon people, nobody brings them any food, and they have food with them. This is a karama. The first question I always ask is, karamat, do they happen? Yes or no? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. They absolutely happen. Secondly, who do they happen to? People who are righteous. It happened to the awliya. There's no doubt about that either. Who is the karama for? It's for the individual himself. And a person who is bestowed with karamat, and many of us might have been given a karama or a miracle in one way, shape, or form. It might be to a smaller degree. Maybe some of us got into an accident, cars totaled, and we walk out without a scratch. Some of us might have been like, and there are situations where people are in, they might be in the middle of a stampede, or they might be in the middle of a fight, or they might be in the middle of something, and it's almost like everybody else is partying around them. It's pretty miraculous. Like, what are the chances of that happening? So they do happen to a smaller scale, and they're meant to be reminders for the individual. They're not meant. Are they meant to be signs for others and to show others? Like this is why Islam is correct? No. Who would that be for? Is there the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was given a karama, and he's given one at a next level, which we call a mu'jiza, which is an absolute miracle. When he is given those, it is to show or to challenge, or a response to a challenge that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given. And even some of the people who saw it, did they accept? No. Right, the Quraysh, they saw things, but they didn't accept them. The Quraysh did things, right? So the splitting of the moon, they saw it. When they all made sajda, they were there. But even that wasn't necessarily enough to bring them to Islam. So, because our religion, guess what, is not founded upon what? Miracles, right? It's not founded upon miracles. Our religion is founded upon belief, it's founded upon iman, it's founded upon tawheed, it's founded upon taqwa. It's founded upon logic, ahsan. Right? These are all tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to prove to us. Because if it was just karamat, or if it was just miraculous things, do we see, I won't say miracles, but do we see miraculous things only happening to Muslims? No, we don't. So if that was the case, then people would be changing religions all the time. So again, our religion is not founded upon miracles, but it does, and the karama, like we said, is for the wali, meaning that the wali, where's his iman? It's already high, and it's just meant to bolster that. A person needs to be of that position in order for it to be bolstered. It is not meant to be a foundational level. Like, that help? So how does one break this thought, right? How do we get out of this cycle? And he says very simply, through realization. What do I need to realize? And he says that when a critic commits a sin, it doesn't have an effect on me. And I thought this was interesting. Meaning, when he criticizes me, what happens? I feel something. But when he commits a sin, that's for him, what do I feel? I don't feel anything. Interesting. He says that we have no issue in accepting their praise even when they're bothered by their critique. And again, perspective. He's saying perspective, think. He also says that he tolerates the criticism of others, but he won't tolerate of himself. And he's like, look at what happens. Look at what happens when, if we remove ourselves from certain scenarios, why are we accepting of this, but we don't accept when it comes this way? It's very what? It's not just personal, but it's very hypocritical, right? Why is it okay over here, but it's not okay over here? Right? That's a problem. This is an issue. If we're going to be accepting or we're going to reject it, we should what? Accept or reject it completely. We shouldn't pick and choose. And he said, again, there should be a universal application. You know, why do we have these double standards? You know, why is we so hypocritical? So again, through that logical rationalization of sitting down and actually thinking and understanding, like, listen, there's certain perspectives that an individual needs to have in order to help him break out of these negative feedback loops. Where does this all stem from? From arrogance, right? Like many vices, unfortunately. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us humble. Ameen. And he says that the shaitan, he's always going to take advantage in those moments of pride, in those moments of arrogance, because that's when we tend to be the weakest, because this pride and this arrogance, it's so close to our nafs, right? It's so integrated into our nafs, into ourself, that it becomes very easy for the shaitan to capitalize on that. And this is why we're able to trick ourselves, and this is why we're able to fool ourselves so easily. He brings an ayah, he says, قُلْ هَلْ نُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِالْأَخْسَرِينَ أَعْمَالًا الَّذِينَ ضَلَّ سَعْيُهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَهُمْ يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا. He says, say, shall we tell you who has the most to lose by their actions, whose efforts in this world are misguided, even when they think they are doing good work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us sincere. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about people who've actually fooled who? Themselves. They've only fooled themselves. Because they haven't fooled Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees them. He knows what's in their hearts. He knows what it is that they're doing. And this is like one of the worst situations. Because I fooled myself. Right? I've made myself think that what I'm doing is deen. I've made myself think what I'm doing is worship. I've made myself think what I'm doing is good and beneficial. And it's very sad. Yes. Hmm. Sure. Hmm. Sure. I mean, so the thing is, when we talk about psychology, right? When we talk about psychology, one of the problems that we as Muslims have with a lot of the concepts of Western psychology is that it is completely devoid of what? Spirituality. And we have to see like it's not a complete overlap, right? I don't want to say that, but there are definitely big sections of overlap between them. It's very difficult for an individual, or I would say it's impossible for an individual to completely break out of some type of psychological trauma without utilizing spiritual tools. I think there are practical tools. I definitely believe that. I'm a big fan of solution-based therapy, which I think is excellent. But I'm also a fan of having a wird, reciting certain adhkar every single day, reading a certain amount of Quran every day, making sure I'm making my prayers on time. Right? These things need to go hand in hand. And helping people frame how to manage, how to challenge, how to regain control, that is one of the most powerful things that anyone can do. The problem with Western psychology, it's everything is about peeling the onion, right, and going back and finding the source, but you don't find the process of investigating people. Oh, where did that come from? Well, why do you think like that? Well, where did this happen? And it's amazing that you don't have this problem focused approach, because the more you focus on a problem, what happens to the problem? It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But if you look, even the prophetic attitude, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's always forward facing, right? It's always forward facing. Like, okay, Tayyip, what are you going to do now? Okay, what is the step, and how are you going to deal with it? In the moment in the moment we realize, okay, how am I going to deal with it? You know what that means? That the problem it cannot be solved. It can be solved and it can be dealt with. So I think having that forward mindset is something that's really important. I think understanding the spiritual elements, this is something that's also very important. Um, Getting into the why, I think, just based on looking at the different ayat, looking at the different hadith, I don't even think it's that important, honestly. Like, where does it stem from? I know. I just want to fix it. Can it help sometimes? I think it can. But for most people, I don't think it does. And not just that, a lot of the concepts that we talked about, like the nature of the nafs, right? So Ghazāli, he talks about the nature of the nafs, and how part of the nafs is rabbani, and it has this desire to lord over and have authority over others and have that control, right? Well, why are Western psychologists even going to address that and talk about that? Right? That's a completely spiritual aspect, and it's a completely spiritual discussion. You cannot have a secular discussion of the heart, of the soul, of the mind, because these are all ghaibi things, right? These are all unseen things. And if I want to learn about the unseen, guess where I have to turn? To the unseen, right? I have to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have to turn to His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And like I said, not to say that it doesn't have its practical applications and benefits, but I would say from therapy forward, there are a lot of good Western concepts, like from therapy onward. I said from behind therapy, that's where I start having I personally start having issues and problems. Like this which is a good chunk of like pharmacology, Western psychology, motivations, Like, you know, and that's where I have issues, because I don't think things actually stem from those problems and issues. You know, and Allah knows best. Yeah. I'm sorry? If I don't believe I'm depressed, I'm not. Huh? Is that Brother Tate, bro? No, but I mean, even depression can be of types. You know, subhanallah, there are people who have they're exhausted, they're unmotivated, but they're still making their 5 daily prayers, right? You have situations like that. Like, they're taking this, all the spiritual means. Now, do we have to start introducing practical elements? Yes, absolutely, right? And there have to be steps. And saying that, I'm personally not a fan of psychotic drugs. I'm not a fan at all. Saying that, is there a portion of the population that is probably better for them? Yes, that I do believe too. To the extent that is done in practice and distributed in the world today, no, I don't think so. So I mean, I think it's it's a much longer discussion to the problems, but I think concerning us in our discussion and having a forward-facing discussion and focusing on solutions, that is far more fruitful. I think how Ghazāli touches on how some of these things stem and where they come from is very applicable to us as Muslims. And it becomes very easy to see, like, oh, okay, that's where that comes from, and these are the methods I can use to go forward. Uh, yes, we do, but does it become a character trait, or does it happen with individual actions, right? So if it becomes a character trait, then this is hypocrisy, and I don't believe most Muslims, let alone people, fall into hypocrisy. I think there are people who do, but at the end of the day, I know when I'm being a hypocrite. Even the hypocrites know, right? The hypocrites knew they were hypocrites. And sometimes we do trick ourselves, but at the expense of being dishonest with our own selves also. Because there are moments, it's not possible. It's not possible that a person is guided and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give him reminders time and again. Right? And those reminders are something that's important, because they're reflection and inflection opportunities that we should take. The moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds you, and it could be just an interaction, like, yo, why are you doing that? Why are you acting like that? Why are you talking down to this person? Right? And it just could be just like a random person who reminds me of those things. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes us to lectures. He exposes us to talks, interactions. Sometimes just an accident. Sometimes just stubbing my toe. And none of us, not a single one of us, has an excuse in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to say, like, oh, you never reminded me. Right? Like, none of us have that excuse. The only thing that many times we fail to do is to stop and reflect and be like, man, am I doing this right? And the easiest way to reflect is, how do I know I'm not reflecting? When I stop asking questions. Like, the moment I stop asking questions, that means I'm trying to protect something. And if I'm trying to protect something, the only thing that I believe that we as individuals, as Muslims, as humans, can successfully protect is ignorance. Right? That's the only thing we could protect. So if we don't want to be ignorant, what do we have to do? We just have to keep engaging. So he says here, in the fourth state is sincerity. So he says that this is the final level. If a person can reach sincerity, then he is the one that is truly successful. And he's like, what does that look like? He says sincerity manifests itself in two ways. It manifests itself in hate, and it manifests itself in love. In hate, it manifests itself that this individual hates being praised. Right? He hates praise. And he hates the praiser. Well, he doesn't use hate. He says that he dislikes. Right? So he should hate praise, and he dislikes the one who praises him. And he says, and the opposite also holds true for love, that he should love when he is criticized, and he should love the person who is criticizing him. He said, this is sincerity. So if I want to determine if I am sincere or not, these are two very easy ways to determine my level of sincerity. That the moment somebody criticizes me, do I take that as an opportunity, or do I take that as a point, that's something that's striking my ego? Or if somebody's praising me, how do I feel about that? Do I want that person to speak about me more? Do I want that person to be more kind, like, you know what I mean, like to say more things? Are there situations where that's necessary? Yes, there are. And we had spoken about this before. Who deserves our praise? I'm sorry? Allah and His Messenger, there's no doubt about that. And after them, who? Our families, right? So we should praise our wives. Like wives should praise their husbands. Like we should praise our children, right? This is something that's important because what are we trying to do with them? We're trying to build them. We're trying to build their character. And the stronger character they have, the easier it is for them to navigate their lives ahead of them. But us as individuals, we should, again, this is our personal balance point. He's not talking about how we deal, he's talking about how we receive. But when we give, we should be generous whenever we give. Whether it be wealth or whether it be in compliments or whether it be in thanks. Ibn Mas'ud, he said that the peak of humility is to dislike being mentioned with virtue and piety. Again, this idea of humility, this idea of fighting some of these ideas. In some narrations, it said, "Woe to the one who fasts, woe to the one who stands in prayer, and woe to the one who wears wool," yani to show that he is pious, except for the one who refrains from people. Meaning that if you do all of these things, but you don't do it in front of people, then it's praiseworthy. It was asked, except for who? And they replied, except for the one who has purified himself from the world, dislikes praise, and prefers criticism. And even he admits, he closes the section saying, and this is really hard. This is really tough. To get to this state and to get to this point, it's extremely challenging and extremely difficult. He says that the most that most people can do is get to that second point. What was the second point? Huh? It was less than equal. At least hiding that the fact, right? He said the highest level most of us can get to is just hiding the fact that we enjoy it. And why is that? Why does he encourage that? Yes, exactly. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Al-ilm bita'allum wa hilm bitahallum." He says that knowledge is by seeking it and forbearance is by practicing it. And it's the same thing here. If I want to get to the point of sincerity, then I should at least do what? Try to practice and show that sincerity. He says the third state, he's like, this isn't something that somebody should aspire to. And he mentions the reason is he mentions the reason that you don't aspire for the third state. He's like, because it's not realistic. He's like, you'll never get to a point where you can actually view criticism and praise completely equally. He said you won't get to that point. Either you're going to be at the second or you're going to surpass it. But being in that late state and being in that condition, he said it's not possible. So how do we know we reached at least the second state? He says we don't, because it's often transient, meaning that all of these states are constantly in flux. Like we're always moving up and down in those states. And again, that's fine. Why? And this is what mujahada is, right? So when we talk about struggle, when we talk about facing difficulty, when we talk about bettering ourselves, well, it's not going to happen like one and done. It's not like, oh yeah, I conquered my nafs, right? It doesn't work like that. Like when we deal with our nafs, it's a constant struggle, and we're constantly working to better ourselves. And our hearts are always going to be swaying. Right? Our hearts, and if we understand that our hearts are constantly going to be swaying, then we're constantly going to be battling with them. I like that. How do you guys like my graphic here? Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Right, because we might win in the moment, and then what happens? We'll get pulled back. Or we might win in a particular characteristic, but does it mean we won in other ones? No, right? So it's always going to be a struggle at different levels for different things, right? I might work to be generous, but does that mean that I'm able to work on my cowardice? Right? Does it mean that I'm able to work on my meanness or my arrogance, or what I mean? Like we try to channel and work in different things in different spaces. Sometimes we can work on them in parallel, and sometimes we can only work like a few at a time, and sometimes only one at a time. And that's why it's mujahada, right? That's why it's constantly struggling and trying to work to better ourselves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to succeed. I mean, so he's saying that you're constantly in this tug of war. You're constantly pulling. Your things are constantly pulling at our hearts. Um, we should always try to um, do our best in that, because sometimes we actually reach, right? Sometimes things actually become within our grasp, and sometimes we lose that. But it doesn't mean we should stop. We should constantly be struggling. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Kana sa'yukum mashkura." He said that your efforts are appreciated. He doesn't say the results. He says the efforts are what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually looks at. And these are the things will that will build our scales. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our scales heavy. I mean. So he says that you can, and there are people who get to that trace of sincerity, right? They are able to actually um, find that and attain that. And he mentions the ideal. He's saying that, okay, well, here, let's try to create again that positive feedback loop. If somebody praises me, then I should dislike it, right? I should try to get to that point. That's what I'm trying to work for. And if I dislike it, then I should be angry, right? I should be upset about that. This is the feeling that I need to strive for. But he's saying that this can even be problematic because sometimes we can be praised and we love that praise, but we still show anger. And he's like, this is just for show. This is just riyā, and this is hypocrisy. Yes. Oh, anger at the fact that I'm being praised, right? Why? Because the thing is like, is it a problem for me to be a good person? No, or to be pious. That's not the problem. The problem is the moment somebody says that about me, what can happen? Right? It can affect my nafs. So it's not because we are not deserving of certain things, but because of the effect that it can actually have on the nafs and the problem that it has. This is why we should train ourselves to push these things away and to avert them. And he also says, how do we respond to criticism? He says that this spectrum is also very telling of our internal scales. If I deal with criticism with anger, then I'm at a lower level. And the closer I get to joy and I get to happiness, the higher that level and that maqam and that position is, and is the one that needs to be strived for. And he says, interestingly enough, he says that this joy should reach a point where you actually hate your nafs. Right? So this nafs that is commanding you to do bad, or the one that is pulling you toward arrogance, this joy should lead to the hatred of that nafs. Where that nafs that loves the praise, the nafs that hates that criticism, we should actually train ourselves that every time we're criticized, we should take joy in that, and it should increase our hate of that nafs because it's working against us. So he says that there are cases where there might be good that's done. So, for example, and I'm sure that this has happened with many of us, where you're working on a project with someone else and the other person takes credit. How does that make us feel? It's kind of salty, right? I'm sorry? Someone else gets a credit, right? So I'm working on a project with someone else. He gets all the praise, he gets all the credit. How do I feel? I feel right. I'm catching feelings, right? Like I'm kind of salty. I'm upset. But he's saying here that we should train ourselves sometimes to allow that person to take the credit. And there are a few reasons for that. What are some of those reasons? Right? It trains my heart. That's something that's important to be able to walk away and not need praise to do, right? Praise shouldn't be my motivation to do good deeds. Right? That's one. What's another one? Trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is what? Right? He's watching. And He knows. And who's the one that records the deeds? The people who are praising or Allah? Right? Allah's the one that records these. And He's the one who actually knows who did the work. He's the one who knows. He knows who's the one who put the time in. He knows the one that put the effort in. So these are good ways for us to train ourselves. Yeah. Anger toward, yes, absolutely. Right. So if somebody else takes credit and we're getting upset, we should train ourselves to remove that anger from our hearts. They should replace with happiness and knowing that this praise that's happening, it's not motivation for me to do good deeds, and I'm going to keep doing good deeds regardless if I receive that praise or not. Yes. In general, no. Right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, that's that in those in that situation is a little bit different, right? And again, it depends on the type of praise. Like your wife can say is like, "Oh, mashallah, you're looking really nice today," and you're like, "Stop praising me," right? Like that might not be that might not be the might be not be the best time to practice these things. Like I learned in class, the sheikh said, "Stop it," right? Like. So obviously there's context, to all of these things, and like we said, it's very different. Even even taking praise from family, we should accept it, right? There's no doubt about it. The question isn't about stopping that person. The question is what's happening internally. Because if my wife says to me like, "Oh, mashallah, you're looking really nice today," or "Oh, you did this really well," or "You did that," I I can well, how should I respond? Yes, thank you, right? Jazakallah khair. No, no, alhamdulillah, I did try. But what should be happening here? It can, but what does that have to do with my feeling toward the praise? Do you understand? Right? You see the difference? Yes, right? Because attaching ourselves to our spouses, that's important. There's no doubt. And praising each other is important. That is no doubt. Even between spouses, can it reach a point of excess? Yes, it can absolutely, and actually can and get to a point of being unhealthy. But again, all of these discussions, remember, where are they happening? Internally, and it's important. Like that internal struggle and that internal fight, that should always continue. So it's not it's not so much how I'm reacting here. It's more so how I'm reacting here. Yes. Hmm. Remember, yes, that's how you should respond. So here, remember, all of these, and I want to be very clear. All of these discussions are internal discussions. These aren't external discussions, right? Where you're like somebody praises you, you're like, hey, stop talking about me, right? Like that's not. I don't think that's yeah. I don't think that's like a really healthy way. It's not healthy, right? I don't think it's a yeah to like just be like, oh no, well you're stupid, stop talking about it. Not like you should thank them, right? You say thank you, jazakallah khair, and that's good, right? That's we should always be thankful anytime somebody has something to say about us, and we ourselves should be generous in our praise. But at the same time, again, these discussions internal. It's less of a discussion what's happening here and more of a discussion what's happening here because I need to constantly fight that. Yes. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Not necessarily because you're there's a difference here. There's a difference between being excited because someone is saying something about you and how you're actually no, no, how you're feeling about the praise itself. Because sometimes, like, if it has more meaning and value, a mother, father, spouse, somebody close, maybe somebody like maybe a superior, like when that praise comes, it's like that is going to be more appreciated. Not necessarily the praise itself, but the fact that they are praising, right? So that needs to be appreciated, and then the internal separation needs to happen in us in the sense of okay, well, how now is my heart becoming attached to that praise or not? Hmm. Sure. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, no, it doesn't. It's not always the case, and not just that. Bands of expression are very different, right? So like even men in general, bands of expression, you're not going to find wide bands, right? The bands of expression for men are generally more narrow. Bands of expression for women are generally a little bit wider, and that's fine. It doesn't mean anything. It's not very reflective. Like does does a man need to like cry his eyes out in order to express sadness? No, but if he's crying, is that an expression? Absolutely. So I think it's important to always keep those in mind too. Like expression will be there. How it's expressed is going to be different from person to person. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Are they related? Yes, right. They're definitely related, but it's not completely reflective. And it can be reflect. And what is it reflective of? Like I said, it can be appreciative of the praise, but it doesn't necessarily like. Then my attachment to the praise is a different. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think these are things that we all we all naturally learn if we have a healthy upbringing. And I'm not talking about like all of us have had healthy upbringings, right? All of us have had our own problems and issues, but in general, people who are raised by loving families will have most of these skills. Not every single one, but they'll have most of these skills. Um, the problem many times is like toxicity in the family. So if like that is the overarching theme in the family of being toxic, then getting these traits like they'll probably be significantly less. And not to say loving parents don't make mistakes. They don't like there's poor elements and things like that. But yeah, yeah. Because all of this is a discussion of character, right? Essentially, this is all just character discussion. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, there's no doubt about why. Remember, this is a discussion of receiving. We're not talking about giving. Sure. Mhm. Yes. No. That's yeah, yeah. No, well, I mean, he doesn't really talk about it, but again, this is an entire discussion of reception. But if being a good Muslim, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man la yashkuru nas la yashkuru Allah." That the one who's not thankful to the people is not thankful to Allah. So we have to be appreciative, right? That's something that's really important. We have to praise, we have to recognize, we have to respect others. So that's something that's definitely important. And someone might be like, "Oh, well, you might be putting that person into fitna." It's like, yeah, but that's their problem, right? It's not. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. The only thing I need to make sure when I'm praising others is that my praise is what no, not just genuine and well intentioned, but what else? It needs to be balanced, right? I can't go crazy with the praise either. I don't want to be too little, and I don't want to be too much. Okay. Anything else? Yes. Yeah, you say mashallah, or you know what I mean? Yeah, you're so pious or something like that. Yeah. And again, it's a good reminder. It's a good reminder for the person who's receiving it that you only have this characteristic, you only have this whatever you're being praised for because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually blessed you with it. And yes, absolutely. It is a good way to kind of temper the praise as well. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, you are. I'm sorry. Is it related? Okay, خلاص اتفضل. Yeah. Like don't be a hype guy. Yeah. Like a gas man. Sure. Hmm. I mean, what it's over. It's praise where it's not due, right? That's what hyping is. Like because when and I don't know if this is across genders, but like when you hype someone, why are you hyping that person? It's usually to get them to do something, right? So I don't. It can be good. It can be good if that peer pressure is to get them to do something good and positive. Um, but again, it should be balanced, and it should be and usually it's more encouragement than it is praise, right? And is I mean, yeah, I mean I see what you're saying, but as long as it's encouragement to do good, then inshallah I think it's okay. I'm sorry, huh? Yeah, yeah. No, I mean like so where you see it a lot in sports, right? Especially weightlifting, right? You see it a lot where you're really pushing and trying to encourage the person. So I think in those specific situations it can definitely help. Um, Outside of that, I don't, you know, what I mean, like just constantly hyping people. It's usually probably not a good idea. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. 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 Uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Sure. So usually with like with new relationships, give it time, right? Like I think making ourselves too vulnerable too quickly is not healthy, right? It's not a good idea. We should always scale into any relationship that we're involved in. Jumping into relationships can many times lead to false expectations, and it's very easy for one party or the other to get hurt. So I'm not saying we should be completely guarded, right? That's not the point either, because part of friendships and relationships is vulnerability, but it should always be scaled, right? It should always be scaled in. And the same thing, even if the relationship is not working, ideally it should be scaled out too. Okay. Scaled out of a relationship if it's bad. Yeah. Unless it's like totally toxic, then it's okay to cut it off. خلاص. See you guys next week. والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خير.